Can you hear me? It's wonderful to be here and to follow such an amazing panel of next generation leaders. I want to build on some of their stories to talk a little bit more about how intergenerational dialogue can actually foster innovation in the family business. So how do we make sure the next gen isn't only heard, but they're also empowered to grow and innovate in their family businesses? And I should start with this universal prophecy for family businesses around the world. And this is just some of the examples. Almost every culture has a different saying that captures this idea of, the first generation building, the second generation kind of just coasting, and then by the third generation, unfortunately, the family business fails. And it fails to pass on that torch and keep the business alive. And a lot of it is due to a lack of renewal and innovation, which I'll focus on, and also give you some advice on intergenerational dialogue, again, that'll foster innovation so that family businesses don't fall prey to this prophecy. There we go. All right, so did it skip one? Make sure. Okay, very good. So, of course, a lot of family businesses fail because of family business dynamics, such as nepotism or entitlement, but a lot of them also fail because of a lack of innovation. And I come from a family surrounded by family businesses. At one time, we had 9. And unfortunately, we lost one because of a lack of innovation. And it was a third-generation family business, 90 years old. And it really had a monopoly at the time. They made factory equipment, and a lot of their success was due to a patent. And while they would make incremental improvements, they really never had any new innovations, any new inventions. And eventually, China started to make that same factory equipment not only cheaper, but better. And once that factory equipment came out, 10 years later, our family business, which was probably our largest in terms of global reach and employee size, was out of business. So this is something very, very true to my heart. And unfortunately, we do see it. We see a lot of family businesses fail because of this lack of innovation. Something we talk about as a generational shadow, where sometimes family businesses are so tied to tradition that they won't renew or change. You sometimes see the next generation, when they think about innovation, they almost think about it as, oh my gosh, it's like spitting on grandpa's grave. And so they don't, and they cling to the strategies of the past. There's also this resistance of new and outside perspectives, and then the lack of investment. And then as I kind of mentioned with our family business, blind to competitive moves. A lot of family businesses over time they look a lot more inward, and they focus on improving efficiencies rather than paying attention to what are my competitors doing. And your competitors can make you obsolete. One study showed that 33% of business leaders had no idea what their competitors were doing. And that's what happened to one of our businesses. A lot of others will rely on their reputation, their old products, rather than innovating. Another big issue, look at this PwC study. 60% of all family business leaders said they had no plans to change their business model. Sad, but when you combine that with the fact of the tenure, CEO tenure in family businesses is on average about 27 years versus 7 years in a non-family business. So when you have someone at the helm for almost 30 years saying, we don't need to change our business model, very few businesses can survive. Think of all the new products, technology, innovation you've seen in just the last 5 to 10 years. And now having someone leading the firm saying, yeah, we don't need to change. Again, very few businesses could survive that. And that's a problem. But I don't want to be just a dark cloud. If anyone knows me, I like to be sunshine. So of course, family businesses have an advantage, okay? And the biggest advantage is that next generation. And I don't want to keep harping on my class, but please take my next gen class in the spring, because this is something that we go over in depth. How can that next generation spur the innovation? The whole advantage, I know a lot of times we talk bad about, I know Chris Robertson said the next gen being anointed or nepotism, but the whole benefit of a family business is that that next generation grows up in it. They learn, it's in their blood. Like even, around the dining room table, they know the industry, they know the way the business works. They have all of that social capital, the context. You can't teach all of that. But if you can combine that with what we saw with these two young gentlemen, the next gens, that's the utopia. That desire, that sense of commitment, that wanting to add a new perspective, that's when you have the magic. That's when you have the magic that are family businesses. And I think a lot of times we forget most of the oldest businesses in the world are family businesses. They're also 33% of all Fortune 500s. When you go outside the US, many times the majority of publicly held firms and the majority of the really successful privately held firms too. They are the engine of the economy in many countries. India, they're amazing. They're just absolutely amazing. And so just a few of the little things, I only have a few minutes here, but really understanding, like we just saw it, all the new thoughts, perspectives, ideas, technology they bring to the family business. And hopefully that next generation, right, is integrating it, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And they many times pave the way for new strategy. The important thing is, though, many times is tying that to the family's values, as multiple speakers today mentioned, as well as our two next gens. Let's see. But again, the key is many times getting that older generation, sometimes we call it the now generation, getting the older now generation to actually listen. And it is difficult. It's very difficult. I know Vidhan talked about, it's hard, wearing the different hats, being the son, working with the dad, going from, father, son, to employee and boss. Really, really hard. And these are just some of the common complaints that many times we have to work through in getting each generation to listen to one another. And it really is each generation. And you can see, if I had to summarize it, a lot of it is both generations don't feel appreciated. They don't feel valued. Many times we don't express the fact to the older generation, we appreciate everything you've built, everything you've sacrificed. But at the same time, a lot of times that older generation doesn't express their appreciation for the younger generation. The younger generation often makes sacrifices too. I'm sure they had lots of opportunities. You still have lots of opportunities, and they're deciding to come back to the family business. A lot of times the older generation doesn't appreciate their commitment, the fact that they're even looking for ways to add value to the business, to innovate, to renew. So we need to much better express this appreciation. And I'm giving you like the little boiler points of a workshop I give on intergenerational communication. But a lot of it is expressing that, and that helps us to hear one another and wanting to move forward together. And so these are just some of the generational issues we many times have to deal with. And the parent-child relationship, it's a really tough one. We could also talk about siblings, that's a whole other day, sibling rivalry, but focusing particularly on the parent-child relationship. And anyone who has siblings know they're different. So some, get along really well, best friends, the best friends, and it's magic. Do they have conflict? Yes, they always get through it. But other parent-child relationships, of course they love one another, but they just rub the wrong way. And so we really have to find the right roles and also the right boundaries for parents and children. So I have a story really quickly. I was giving a panel in Italy, and it was all these very large family businesses that had grown their manufacturing through internationalization. And there was one gentleman in particular on the panel who was just, for an Italian, like even for an Italian, he was macho, like so macho, strong, loud, very competitive, aggressive personality. You could see that he was like a really strong leader, builder of the firm. And towards the end, we had questions in the audience, and someone in the audience obviously knew him very well, and said, "How do you do it? How do you work so well with your son?" And he said, "Oh, I forgot to mention this. I'm in charge of Europe. He's in California. He's in charge of North America. And that's how they worked it. And sometimes, it's making these little things, and again, knowing roles, creating boundaries. And then someone earlier today asked the generational gap. So in a family business, not only are you dealing with different generations, you've got this, which all organizations are dealing with. And you can do more. There's a lot of research on this if you need to. If you're having trouble not being heard, speaking to someone in a different generation, look at the quick research on this. Because a lot of times it might be the way, it's how you're communicating. And remember, you can't change someone else, but you can adapt the way you're communicating. If I had to give this really quickly, which that's what I'm going to do, Ravi, the older generation, they're not very expressive. They were the generation many times didn't even say, I love you. They showed it through action. So they show it coming home for dinner, building this business, working 80 hours a week. That is how I'm showing you the commitment and love for you. As we go to each younger generation, more and more expressive. I learned this, my daughter's in the audience. Now I have to validate her. We've never heard of this. Validation? What is this? But they need lots of positive reinforcement, consistent positive reinforcement, and this validation. So a lot of times, again, look at how we're communicating, because a lot of times that will get you heard. And then just this is final tips, and then I do have a slide with some stuff from familybusiness.org. We're now the #1 leader in the world, dedicated to family business education. Little plug there. But how do we turn dialogue into innovation? Because this really is a superpower of family businesses. Again, taking the experience and skills of the older generation and combining it with the new perspectives, the new ideas, and the technology and creativity of the younger generation. A lot of it is based on values. So rather than it being, my idea versus yours, my way of doing things versus yours, it's ours. Really try and tie what you're doing to the legacy of the family business. Zildjian is an excellent example. They're one of the oldest family businesses in America. They're right here in Massachusetts. They make cymbals, like for a drum. Okay? They started in Constantinople, started by an alchemist. Okay, they thought, unfortunately he couldn't, he thought combining different alloys and metals, he'd create gold. The business was started in the 1600s. To this day, the family still talks about in search of gold. It's tied into who they are. They're always innovating. They just came out with a new product this year. But tie innovation to who you are so that you can really sell it to the older generation. Vidhan talked about it really, really well, and that's why I kind of talked about it. This idea of trust is built in baby steps. A lot of times, big mistake the next gens make. Any of you watched HBO Succession, you saw this episode 1. They try and come in and do a big splash, huge innovation, change things up. They overpromise, and then they underdeliver, and they lose trust. Trust, especially with the older generation, remember, they're looking at actions. Trust is slowly built. Take on small projects, show you can do it, build that credibility, and so forth. And then really, as much as you can, try and create a project. It can be anything, and it can be on the business side. It could also be on the family side. Maybe create a family constitution together, but find something that you can work together and foster. And then just a last slide, just some different things from familybiz.org. Families, and I know my students always love this one, it's a tool that shows you how does your family's philosophy match with actually your business's strategy. It's a really good tool. In my class, we do the Defend Your Family Business exercise where it's an exercise you can look at. Basically, you take the role of the competitor and you think, how would I kill my business? How would I kill the business? And then you have to, can you see it coming? But these are just some different tools to hopefully leave you with as we continue this amazing day. That's it. Thanks.